Welcome to the Missions Podcast, the show that explores your hard questions on missions, theology, and practice to help goers think and thinkers go. I'm Alex Kochman, Director of Advancement and Communications with ABWE. Again, in person here with old buddy, old pal.
Yes.
Scott Dunford, pastor of Redeemer Church in Fremont, California, and Jonathan Arnold here, Dr. Jonathan Arnold. You were the first guest we had on the Missions Podcast 5 years ago when we were talking about the missions, talking about missions in the Reformation.
Wow.
Yes.
One of the first. So the last T4T,
I think you were the first. I think we literally did.
Second time in between.
I think we did one episode by ourselves, and then we did two with you.
That's exciting.
So if you've been listening since episode 2, you know Jonathan.
Yes.
And you made it around anyway.
We made it full circle.
So tell our listeners what you're doing now, because you've changed roles and now you're at Southwestern.
Yeah, so now I'm teaching at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, teaching church history, historical theology, and then running our PhD program. So overseeing everything that goes with our 330 strong PhD students.
That's fantastic.
So you're not a very smart guy, is what you're saying. You're just kind of a basic.
I don't know that makes me smart. It does make me over some smart people. So there you go.
That's good. Hey, that's better.
That's exactly it. So
that's better. So as we're talking about things you've been working on most recently, you're working on a book right now for Crossway.
Yep.
I think, is it okay for us to say that?
I hope
it's
so.
not done yet. On prayer. And obviously, prayer is a huge part of missions. It's the fuel of missions. And so you're doing some work right now. So explain us a little bit what the project is.
Sure, yeah. So we're trying to put together, a friend of mine named Zach Carter and I are putting together a book of prayers from across church history. So obviously, I teach church history. He's a church history student himself. So delving into where the church has been across the tradition, especially through those that end up in our tradition and kind of in this stream. So going all the way back to the patristics and then working our way forward. It's intended to be a very usable, individualized prayer book with prayers from all kinds of areas, but also giving some biographical context, some historical context, so that you understand why those prayers were written, when they were written, and can actually put them into a position where you can understand where the church has come from and see how God has been working through his people for the last 2,000 years outside of biblical history. So,
who are some of the historical figures whose prayers you've highlighted?
Yeah, so we've got some of your basics. We've got some from Augustine of Hippo. We've got some from John Chrysostom. But then we've got some from a whole host of others that maybe don't fit in the normal, at least in our tradition necessarily. So Thomas à Kempis. We've got some from even some of the broader Catholic tradition that still fits within our theological spectrum. And then moving our way forward all the way into the Reformation and into the contemporary era. So people like John Owen, some of the early Baptists like Benjamin Keach, who I worked on, absolutely. And so we tried to pull from all areas of that. So.
I was going to ask a question.
Ask a question.
Then please do.
So as you're doing this work, I mean, I like using prayer books. I like reading. It's fascinating to me. Like, what were they praying, and how prayers look different over the ages. What are you learning that you think would be useful for people thinking about missions and thinking about going into the harvest field? What are you seeing in these prayers that kind of is interesting to you?
Yeah, so for me, coming out of, I grew up Southern Baptist and still am in a Southern Baptist church and working with Southern Baptist institutions. We don't have a long history of having written prayers. Right. And in fact, as you move back, even in the early Baptists, they were against writing them because there's this idea that if you're writing these prayers out, then you're either leaving the Holy Spirit out on one side or you're depending too much on human tradition. So what happened for me is I just fell in love with the fact that God has tended to bring his people through the same journey, and people have been there and done that. So being able to learn from the wisdom that God has given to his people all along. And so even just for me, writing down those prayers and learning to write those down and to put them into a published form if possible, but even not, for your local church, writing out prayers for your church, and as a pastor, writing prayers out for your congregation so that they have something that they can do together and walk through this together and understand that, that's not the only way to pray. I'm all for extemporaneous prayer and having your individualized side as well, but to be able to put yourself with such a great cloud of witnesses, which, by the way, is the title of the book. So there you go.
Oh, really?
Great cloud of witnesses.
Cloud of witnesses, okay. So we're here at Together for the Gospel, the very last one. So we're obviously focusing on the church. We're focusing on all sorts of theological types of topics. But being that this is the Missions Podcast, there's something interesting. If you've ever been through or been exposed to the Perspectives course.
Absolutely.
They claim that every time there's a major movement forward in history as far as missions goes,
there's a massive prayer movement. Yeah.
So is that true in your opinion?
God tends to work through prayer. So my guess would be that that would be the case. I haven't done I know they make that claim. I've taught in that course before. I've seen that claim being made. I don't know how you would prove it scientifically that, hey, this is what's causing it, that kind of thing. But certainly there are massive movements in missions history that are surrounded by prayer, and that's the way God works. So it makes perfect sense that would be the case, that God's people are about God's work, and they're going to be praying about what is on God's heart. And so
it does bring up another question, though, too, because that kind of caught up in some of the assumptions is that missions didn't really start until William Carey, too. But you've studied enough in church history to know that, no, there's plenty of missional activity happening before that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No, we like that story, especially from the Baptist perspective, because then you grab your...
That's right, he's our guy.
Yes, absolutely, he's ours. But no, the missions, even that exact kind of missions movement with societies that are supporting missionaries, or at least supporting churches that are supporting missionaries, it was going on at least 150 years prior, right? That's not a new thing. And then you go back all the way. I mean, Calvin is sending them out of Geneva with the very clear intention that they're going out to love the nations by bringing the gospel and not coming back, right? I mean, this is, and then you can go back in the tradition, and I mean, Gregory, when he's sending out Augustine of Canterbury, that whole movement is clearly a missions focus. Right? It's always there. This is God's heart. And so you find it all the way through. So rather than saying, hey, we started this, just go, no, we joined in with what God has been doing. And we might have done it a little, I mean, Carey is amazing, right? He did stuff that nobody else had done before and did it in a way that hadn't been done and really set the stage for the modern style. But that doesn't mean it's not, we don't need brand new, right? We need God's heart, and that's all we need is to do it in the way that God intended for it to be done,
So how can people find out more, either about your work that you're doing or about the PhD programs at Southwestern?
Yeah, so PhD programs at Southwestern, you can easily email me at swibits.edu, that's swbts.edu.
And it's just rolls off the tongue.
It rolls off the tongue, it does. And our program is just RDS, that's Research Doctoral Studies, so RDS at swibits.edu. You can also find us on our website, just Southwestern, swbts.edu, and it's all there. As far as the book goes, it should be coming out in the fall. And so anybody that's interested, Crossway will have information on it, or I'm happy to send out information as well. But you can also be praying for us in the spirit of prayer, that we actually get it done on time and can get
Alex
it published.
and I are going to write some prayers out and send them in.
Do it, and contemporary.
Just keep it in mind.
Just keep the licensing fees, small, because we don't have a hard...
In truth, though, on a slightly serious note, the Valley of Vision, I read that regularly.
Yes.
We have a pre-written pastoral prayer that's a part of our liturgy in our church. If somebody's a missionary, or if somebody's just interested and follows the show and is listening to this, and they don't see the value of pre-written prayers written by other people, I think just in general, just expose yourself to that. There's so much goodness there, and your book is one good way to do that.
No, absolutely. And that's really what we're trying to do, is really just put these prayers in the hands of the people who love church history, love seeing what God's doing, and being able to connect people to that is just part of the passion.
Very good.
Well, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me again.
Thanks for coming back on.
Yes.
Old friend of the show.
There you go.
And we will see you next time.